Tanya's lungs felt as though they were shrinking, every breath harder than the last. The living room air was thick with an ultimatum no one wanted to voice, yet everyone understood. She stood between two forces, Marcus, the man she loved, and Bernard, her father, who loomed over them like a stern judge ready to condemn. Bernard's voice cut through the silence. Marcus isn't good enough for you. He'll never amount to anything. His words hit Tanya like hammer blows, each one threatening to shatter her resolve. I won't stand by and watch you throw your life away on a man who can't even secure his own future. A tremor ran through Tanya's hands. She wanted to scream that love wasn't about money or status, that it was about the dreams and loyalty they had nurtured together, but she'd spent a lifetime obeying Bernard. Every instinct told her to speak, yet the words caught in her throat like shards of glass. Marcus's eyes were wide, desperate. Tanya, please, he rasped, voice cracking under the weight of heartbreak. You know what we've built, what we mean to each other. Bernard's glare only hardened. She's not throwing her life away on you, boy. I won't allow it. Tanya's pulse thundered in her ears. Her father's authority was suffocating, and she hated herself for caving beneath it. But that hate wasn't enough to make her resist. Her lips parted, barely forming the words. I'm sorry, Marcus, she whispered. He reached for her, heartbreak twisting his features. Tanya, don't do this. Yet Bernard's presence loomed, an unspoken threat Tanya couldn't ignore. I can't, she choked out. Marcus's face crumpled in pain, and with each step he took toward the door, Tanya felt her own heart cracking. Then, the door clicked shut behind him, leaving her rooted in place, tears burning hot on her cheeks. Tanya stared at the closed door, her world unraveling. Had she just made the biggest mistake of her life? Or was she simply too afraid to defy the one man who had always controlled her future? The answer lay beyond that door, and she wasn't sure she'd ever find the courage to follow. Marcus couldn't remember the last time he had felt so hollow. The street seemed endless, and his mind was a storm of anger, sadness, and confusion. Every step he took felt like he was walking further away from the life he had built with Tanya, and he didn't know where to go next. The pain was so raw, so real, that for the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to do with himself. He had given everything to her, everything, and now it felt as if it had been nothing but a waste. He spent the next few days in a haze, avoiding friends and family, not knowing how to explain what had happened. How could he explain that the woman he had built his future with was now lost to him? How could he explain that the love he had given was now rejected because his dream didn't match her father's standards? One evening, as he sat in his small apartment staring at the darkened city skyline, something shifted within him. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it began to morph into something else. He wasn't going to let Tanya's rejection define him. He wasn't going to let it break him. I'm going to make something of myself, he muttered, his voice harsh with determination. I'll prove them wrong. I'll prove her wrong. That night he enrolled in medical school. It wasn't just an escape from the pain, it was a promise to himself. He would become someone that even Bernard could not ignore. He would rise above the shadows of rejection, of doubt, and carve out a future that was entirely his own. The first few months were grueling, but every late night spent studying, every test passed, was a victory. The pain that once consumed him became fuel for his success. He worked harder than he ever had before, and slowly but surely, the man who had been left broken by love began to rebuild himself. By the time he graduated, Marcus had transformed. His body was leaner, his posture stronger. His once haunted eyes now sparkled with confidence. The boy who had been rejected by the woman he loved was gone, replaced by a man with a future. As Marcus stood in the operating room, hands steady over his first heart surgery, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe, just maybe, this is how I heal, by helping others. The journey ahead was just beginning, and Marcus was ready. Marcus's rise in the medical world was swift. His reputation grew, as did his fame. He became one of the most sought-after heart surgeons in the state, praised not only for his precision, but for his dedication to his patients. His name was whispered with reverence in medical circles, and it wasn't long before he was headhunted by top hospitals. Yet, despite his success, the emptiness remained. Tanya's absence was a hole in his life he couldn't fill, but he had learned to live with it. His work consumed him, and as long as he focused on the surgery, on healing others, the ache inside him was bearable. He stood at the head of the operating table, his hands steady as he directed his team. The patient on the table was in critical condition, but Marcus's confidence was unwavering. Each incision was precise, each movement measured. He didn't need to think anymore. The surgery, like his career, had become second nature. "Dr. Knight," one of the nurses said, her voice filled with admiration. "You're incredible. I've worked with many surgeons, but you're in a class of your own." Marcus nodded, grateful for the compliment, but inside he felt a pang of emptiness. There was no one here to share the victory with. There was no Tanya, no one to hold his hand when the job was done. The operation was a success, and as he stood outside the recovery room, watching his patient wake up, Marcus couldn't help but feel proud. His work had saved a life, but there was still something missing. A text message buzzed on his phone. The name on the screen made Marcus's heart skip a beat. Tanya. Would this be the moment he had waited for, or had too much time passed? Tanya's world was spinning out of control. The phone call came in the dead of night, pulling her from a restless sleep. Her father had suffered a heart attack. She rushed to the hospital, panic clawing at her chest as she tried to make sense of it all. The man who had always been so strong, who had built her life around his rules, was now lying helpless in a hospital bed. She stood at his side, watching the monitors beep steadily, but she couldn't focus. She had been so busy with her own life, her own guilt about Marcus, that she hadn't realized how fragile her father was. He was mortal, just like anyone else. Her mind kept racing. How could she be here, after everything? After the way she had let Marcus slip away, how could she face her father? Just as she began to break down, a nurse approached her. "You must be his daughter. I just wanted to tell you, doctor. Marcus Knight is one of the best heart surgeons we have. He's been instrumental in saving lives around here." Tanya's breath hitched. It couldn't be. Marcus, the same Marcus who had walked away from her years ago, was now the one standing between her father and death. The realization hit her like a wave. Could Marcus really save her father now? Could the man who had once been her everything, who had broken her heart, be the one to put everything right? Tanya walked through the hospital corridor, her steps measured but unsteady, as though the weight of what was about to unfold threatened to break her. She had always been the dutiful daughter, following her father's orders, living a life built on what was expected of her. But this was different. This wasn't a choice she could make for anyone but herself. She could feel the walls of the hospital closing in on her as the realization set in. Marcus, the man she had pushed away, the man who had been a part of her life in ways her father could never understand, was now the only one who could save her father. The man who had once been her love, her soulmate, was now an unexpected savior. Was this fate, or was it just another cruel twist of irony? As she neared the surgical ward, Tanya's mind spiraled. She had tried so hard to move on, to build a life without Marcus. But no matter what she did, no matter how many distractions she found, his memory lingered in the deepest parts of her heart. Could she face him now, after all the years and the broken promises? When she turned the corner, she saw him. He was standing in the hallway, his scrubs a sterile blue, his posture rigid. His face, though exhausted from years of training and surgery, still held that same quiet strength she remembered. But there was something different in his eyes, something distant. Marcus had always been her rock, but now he seemed like a stranger. Tanya stopped in her tracks, unsure of how to approach. He hadn't seen her yet, and for a moment she wished she could turn around and walk away. She didn't know what to say. What could she say to the man who had been her everything, and yet was now so far removed from the person she had once known? "Doctor? Knight?" Her voice was soft, tentative, as if speaking to a ghost of her past. Marcus turned toward her, his deep-set eyes locking onto hers. The briefest flicker of recognition passed through them, but it was quickly replaced by that cold, professional mask he had perfected over the years. "Miss Davis," he said, his voice steady, but the distance between them was clear. "I'll be performing your father's surgery." His eyes scanned her face, as if trying to read her, but the expression he wore told her that whatever connection they had once shared was buried deep beneath layers of time, resentment, and personal growth. Tanya opened her mouth to say something, anything, but her throat tightened. She couldn't find the words. What was there to say? She had left him, hadn't fought for him when it mattered. What right did she have to ask him for anything now? "Will he be all right?" Her voice broke, and Tanya hated herself for sounding so vulnerable. She wasn't that woman anymore. She had grown stronger, hadn't she? Marcus's eyes softened for just a moment, but he quickly regained control. "I've done this many times. Your father is in good hands." His voice was detached, as though he were talking to a colleague, not someone who had once shared a life with him. Tanya swallowed hard, trying to control the tears threatening to spill. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling a lump form in her throat. Marcus nodded, then turned to walk away, leaving Tanya standing in the hallway. The distance between them felt insurmountable, like there was no bridge strong enough to carry them back to the way things had once been. Tanya watched as Marcus disappeared behind the door to the operating room. Her heart ached with every step he took away from her. Could they ever repair the rift between them? Or had the years of silence and the weight of their past been too much for either of them to overcome? The surgery was delicate, but Marcus had faced far more dangerous situations in his career. His hands, though steady, moved with a practiced confidence, each motion calculated and precise. The sterile smell of the operating room, the beep of the heart monitor, it was all second nature to him now. Yet as his scalpel moved over Bernard's chest, he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in his gut. The man on the table wasn't just any patient. This was Tanya's father, the man who had rejected him, who had torn apart the love he had once shared with her, a love that had felt so certain, so powerful, and yet had been so easily dismissed. He focused on the task at hand, as he always did, but his mind wandered. How had he gotten here? How had the man who once fought for a future with Tanya ended up saving the man who had prevented that future from ever happening? And what did it all mean? Was this some twisted form of fate, or just the inevitable course of their lives? As he worked, Marcus's thoughts turned to Tanya. He hadn't seen her in years, but the memories were as vivid as ever. Her laugh, her smile, the way she had looked at him when they had first fallen in love, those moments felt like a lifetime ago. Had she changed as much as he had? Or was she still the woman who had chosen her father's approval over him? His focus wavered for a fraction of a second, just long enough for the heart monitor to beep erratically. Marcus's heart stopped in his chest, his breath catching in his throat as he quickly snapped back into the moment. He couldn't afford to let anything distract him now. The stakes were too high. Cliffhanger. The monitor beeped again, even faster now, signaling a complication. Marcus's breath quickened, but his hands remained steady. He couldn't let himself fail. Not now, not when everything was on the line. Would he be able to save Bernard, or was this the moment when everything slipped through his fingers? Tanya sat in the waiting room, her fingers twisted together as she stared at the floor. The minutes stretched into hours. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was a constant reminder of how powerless she was. Her father's life was in the hands of the one person she had abandoned, and the guilt was almost unbearable. She had hoped for this moment, hadn't she? She had waited all these years for an opportunity to fix things, to make amends. And now here she was, sitting in a sterile waiting room, with no idea how to move forward. Her thoughts were chaotic, torn between her father's health and the unresolved feelings she still had for Marcus. The love they had shared was undeniable. She had always known, deep down, that Marcus was the one. But she had chosen to obey her father, and now she was paying the price for it. Could she really undo the past? Could she convince Marcus that she was sorry, that she wanted to fight for them? Her mind drifted back to the years they had spent apart. She had convinced herself that she had made the right choice, that her loyalty to her father was more important than the love she shared with Marcus. But now, sitting in that cold waiting room, she wasn't so sure. The door to the waiting room opened, and Tanya's heart skipped a beat. A nurse entered, her face unreadable. Tanya stood up quickly, her breath catching in her chest. "Doctor, Knight wants to speak with you," the nurse said softly. Tanya nodded, fear and hope fighting for dominance inside her. Was her father okay? Had Marcus been able to save him? Or was this the moment she had feared? Tanya's heart hammered in her chest as she walked toward the surgical ward. The last few hours had been a blur, each moment stretching endlessly in her mind. She had no idea what Marcus would say, what he would do. Would he acknowledge her, or would he turn away, the years of pain between them too deep to overcome? When she saw him standing at the door, his eyes filled with exhaustion and determination, Tanya felt a surge of emotion she couldn't contain. The man in front of her was a stranger, and yet he was still the man she had loved with everything she had. "Is he all right?" Tanya asked, her voice fragile. Marcus nodded slowly, his voice softer than before. "He's stable, the surgery was successful, but there's still a long road ahead of him." He paused, as if weighing his words carefully. "I did everything I could, Tanya." Tanya swallowed the lump in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But Marcus wasn't done. His face softened for a moment, and then he looked at her with a mixture of sadness and regret. "Tanya, we've both changed. We're not the same people we were back then. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I can't pretend that what happened between us hasn't left a scar on both of us." Tanya's heart clenched. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "But I was scared, Marcus. I was scared of losing everything. And now I don't know how to fix it." The days passed slowly, each one bleeding into the next. Bernard's condition improved, but Tanya couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that followed her. Every conversation with her father, every moment spent by his bedside, was overshadowed by the unspoken truth that hung between her and Marcus. She had been given a second chance, but what did she do with it? Her father, though awake and recovering, was more frail than she had ever seen him. The man who had once commanded every room he entered was now vulnerable, uncertain of his future. He had always been the one to guide her, to push her toward the life he had planned for her, but now she saw him in a new light. He was human, and as much as she wanted to protect him, she realized that he couldn't protect her from herself. It was a moment of reckoning. She couldn't live in the shadow of her father's approval anymore. She had to make her own choices, no matter the cost. Tanya sat by Bernard's bedside, her hand holding his. His grip tightened, and she looked up to see him awake, his eyes filled with something she hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. "Tanya," he said softly, his voice raspy, "I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted what was best for you." Tanya's heart ached as she looked at her father, the man who had always believed that his way was the only way. "I know, Dad, but maybe what's best for me is learning to make my own way." Cliffhanger. As Tanya sat by her father's side, her mind was elsewhere. She knew what she needed to do next. It was time to fix what had been broken. But would Marcus even want her to? Would he ever forgive her for what she had done to him? The hospital courtyard was alive with the quiet hum of activity as patients, staff, and visitors went about their day. Tanya stood just outside the building, watching Marcus as he made his way toward the exit. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement, and for a brief moment, everything seemed still. The world felt like it had stopped spinning, leaving only the two of them and the ghosts of what could have been. Marcus, as always, moved with purpose. But today there was something different about him. There was an air of finality in his steps. He wasn't walking toward the future, he was walking away from it. Tanya's heart ached as she stood frozen, unable to make herself move. The distance between them felt insurmountable, as if years of hurt and missed opportunities had built an unbreakable wall. She had spent so much time thinking about the past, about what she had lost, that she had never truly considered the man Marcus had become. He was no longer the young, vulnerable man who had poured his heart out to her. He was a man of confidence and strength, someone who had built a future for himself without her. Tanya wanted to call out to him, to beg for another chance, but her throat tightened. What could she possibly say? What right did she have to ask for more? She had made her choice all those years ago, and now it was too late. She watched him walk away, his figure growing smaller with each passing second, until he disappeared into the distance. It was over. She had lost him. But as Tanya stood there, the realization began to settle in. She wasn't the same person she had been when she had let Marcus go. She had spent years living in the shadows of her father's expectations. But now she understood that the only way to truly live was to follow her own heart. The wind picked up, and Tanya pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, her mind racing. She couldn't go back to the way things had been. Not with her father, not with Marcus. The past was gone, and the future was uncertain. But one thing was clear. She had to fight for herself. For the first time in years, Tanya felt like she could take control of her own life. As she turned to walk back into the hospital, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out of her pocket and saw a message from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the brief text. "I never wanted to hurt you. But it's not too late. Let's fix this, Tanya. I'm still here." The words were simple, yet they held so much weight. Marcus had reached out. Had he truly forgiven her? Was there hope for them, after all? Days turned into weeks as Tanya and Marcus navigated the fragile process of rebuilding what they once had. Their initial interactions were marked by hesitant smiles and cautious conversations, each unsure if the other truly wanted to pick up where they left off. Yet, for every awkward silence, there was a moment of laughter, genuine and comforting, that reminded them both of the bond they'd shared so many years ago. They kept things simple: walks in the park at twilight, coffee breaks in a cozy corner cafe, and afternoons by the river where they would talk for hours, rediscovering each other's hopes and fears. Over time, the wounds that had festered from years of separation began to mend. Forgiveness, they learned, wasn't an event. It was a process, and each day brought them one step closer to wholeness. For Tanya, the hardest part wasn't apologizing to Marcus. It was forgiving herself. She had spent so long under the weight of her father, Bernard's expectations, that she'd never realized how much she had lost in the process. Now, standing beside Marcus, she saw clearly how deeply she'd allowed someone else's opinion to shape her future. Reclaiming her life meant letting go of that guilt. But one thing was still missing: an acknowledgement from Bernard himself. He owed Marcus, at the very least, a recognition of the cruel way he had written him off all those years ago. Since the day Marcus had saved Bernard's life, tension had hung in the air. Grateful though he was, Bernard had yet to address the past. Finally, one sunny afternoon, that moment arrived. Tanya invited her father to the very park where she and Marcus often strolled. Marcus was already there, leaning against a tree, gazing out at the water with a calm that belied the weight of this meeting. Bernard approached slowly, a mix of shame and resolve etched across his features. "Marcus," Bernard began, voice trembling just enough to betray his nerves. "I need to say something to you. I've been a stubborn man. I was wrong about who you were and who you could become. I thought you'd never amount to anything. And here you are, a heart surgeon who saved my life." He paused, swallowing hard. "I owe you more than I can ever repay. I owe you an apology for thinking your future was worthless." Marcus turned to face him fully. For a moment, the two men just stood there, the memory of all that had happened crackling in the air. Tanya held her breath, her heart pounding. Bernard continued, clearing his throat. "When you saved me, you didn't just save my life. You saved me from my own ignorance. I see now that I judged you unfairly, and I'm truly sorry." He exhaled, looking Marcus directly in the eye. "I hope one day you can forgive me." A quiet beat passed. Then Marcus extended his hand. "I accept your apology, sir. It means a lot to hear you say that." Bernard grasped Marcus's hand, relief flickering in his eyes. "Thank you, and I hope you can find it in your heart to be part of this family again." Tanya's vision blurred with tears. She stepped forward and slipped her hand into Marcus's free one. He gave it a gentle squeeze. The three of them stood in a tentative circle, once broken, now healing. It wasn't a perfect picture, but it was real. It was a start. Over the next few days, a cautious but hopeful relationship began to form between Bernard and Marcus. There were still old hurts, but now there was also a genuine willingness to move past them. Tanya watched with relief, feeling her spirit grow lighter with each conversation that ended in mutual respect rather than anger. One late afternoon, as Tanya and Marcus walked the familiar path through the park, their hands brushed and then clasped. Tanya looked up at him, a shy smile on her lips. "We're finally here, aren't we? We've come full circle." Marcus returned her smile, nodding. "We have. It wasn't easy, but maybe that's what makes it worth it." They strolled until they reached their favorite bench by the river. Tanya exhaled slowly, letting the gentle breeze carry away the remnants of her guilt. "My father finally understands what I've known all along, that you were never the bum he made you out to be." Marcus chuckled softly. "I guess saving his life helped." His tone was light, but Tanya could sense the relief in his voice. She turned to him, heart full. "I'm proud of you, proud of us. We've both grown so much." They paused in comfortable silence, listening to the water flow past. Then Marcus reached for Tanya's hand, his eyes steady and warm. "You know, I think we're both ready for this, for whatever comes next." Tanya's smile lit up her face. "We'll figure it out," she murmured, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Together." Cliffhanger. Just then, Bernard appeared at the edge of the path, a hopeful expression on his face. He hesitated, as though not wanting to intrude. But when Marcus caught his eye and gave a slight nod, Bernard approached, hands in his pockets. Was this the start of a new family bond, or would old wounds resurface at the worst possible time? The three stood together, the possibilities endless, leaving the future wide open for whatever came next.